So getting into the textbook discussion, the textbook starts off by kind of, trying to clarify some confusions with science. Because, of course, we have all of these sort of cultural assumptions and values that we've kind of stuck into that notion science. That notion of scientific knowledge is so important to us that, yeah, it's a cultural phenomenon as much as it is kind of a method of defining truth. So, but those cultural kind of understandings of science or images that we've kind of superimposed onto science can kind of muddle and confuse what science itself actually is. So the first one that's discussed by the textbook is technology. So yeah, and you can see how it would be the case that this would be confused. So you take a look at any kind of science program intended for kids, and what will it show you? It'll show you pictures of like rocket ships flying into the moon. It'll show you pictures of atoms, which is fine, like those little atomic particles. It'll show you pictures of cell phones. It might show you some beakers or some Bunsen burners, right? Point being is that science is often confused with technology. Now, although it is true that we get a lot of new technology from new scientific knowledge, from new discoveries allow us to build things in different ways, technically speaking, the two are separate, right? So yeah, it's that idea that you're conflating science down to research and development. That's not what science itself is. It's about discovering the truth about the nature of kind of matters of fact or the universe, right? But it's not properly speaking, and we can build things on the basis of that, but properly speaking, it's not the same thing. The second one is the confusion of science with ideology. And there are a couple of different ways that you can sort of take this, right? So some consider science itself to be a particular worldview or a particular belief system that's almost kind of in competition with, like, let's say, Catholicism or with like any of the other religions. So Catholicism, for instance, posits a particular cause for the entire universe. So God came along and started the universe or something of the sort and then created everything. And then other religions might have other ones too. And then there's the scientific understanding of that. And it kind of has a particular worldview that goes along with it, right? So right now it's the Big Bang or something like that is kind of seen as the nature of the universe. Yeah, and you kind of know what's involved with that. So a scientific worldview presupposes that everything's composed of matter and that everything obeys the laws of the universe and there's no such thing as God. So it presupposes atheism or secularism, all those things that go along with it, right? Now, technically speaking, one other aspect of it I should say as well too, or that it stands in kind of opposition to other what they call knowledge traditions nowadays too. So those various knowledge traditions kind of science would stand in opposition to them and almost like a dominating position. So the idea nowadays is that scientific worldviews, scientific understanding of the world just presupposes white man mythology. It's Derrida's famous term. Universalism is white man's mythology, and that's kind of the language that science talks in. Yeah, it's one way of going in and saying our cultural views are better than yours because ours are scientific, therefore your origin story is bogus or something of the sort, right? Yeah, now it may be used that way by, like during colonialism, for instance, some people may have valued themselves and their own kind of understanding the universe is better than others, just as a way to kind of justify what they were doing during that time period. Properly speaking, again, though, science itself has no allegiance to any particular worldview. It doesn't, right? So there are particular views of the universe, like the Big Bang Theory, for instance, that is suggested by the evidence as being the best explanation for what we're observing. That's kind of it, under rigorous conditions of observation or methodical conditions of observation. But technically speaking, science has no allegiance to any particular worldview. Indeed, what that worldview is changes considerably over time. So it's what Kuhn, those of you who know, call a paradigm shift. So periodically we paradigm shift in science and the entire way that we view the universe will change. Not just that, even things that we associate with religion, in that famous opposition between religion and science, were considered scientific at one point. So the scientific explanation of the universe at one point was that God created it for a very, very long time. It's just we have, based on the observations, based on best theories going, that's no longer the case. Point being, science itself has no kind of particular allegiance to any worldview. It doesn't, in itself, stand in opposition to anything at all. Yeah, it doesn't. But that's one other way that science is sort of confused. Now, the next one, how am I doing on time? I'm good. Now, the next thing that well, it's not really even a confusion with science. It's kind of a particular overshooting on what science can actually do. And you may have heard of this one. It's called scientism. Yeah, science should not be confused with scientism. It's advocates of science themselves. They kind of go in one direction of considering science to be something like an ideology. The idea behind scientism is that scientific views are not just superior regarding matters of fact in the world than other views. So it's not one particular type of knowledge that we can have, but it's the only type of knowledge we can have. which is not the case. It is not the case, right? Yeah, it's the view, and you'll see some keys. I'm not going to spell them out in detail because I don't want to remind you of the pandemic. But the view that science should determine everything we do regarding everything, right? So it can not only tell us about states of affairs in the world, but it can tell us what to do. Any knowledgeable belief should be informed by science. Science should guide the way into the future or something of the sort, right? Now, the problem with that particular view is that science can't actually do that. It's not equipped to be able to do that. What science deals with is what is. It deals with matters of fact and states of affairs. So it can settle. It's the best way of settling debates regarding what the case is, what's actually going on. That's what it can do. Now, there's a leap from there to what we should actually do in a given situation, right? In a given situation. So it's actually considered to be a fallacy, and it's kind of a longer one. It doesn't have a cool name like ad hominem, but it's getting what we ought to do from what is, and we can't do that. Science doesn't allow us to go from what is to what ought to be. There's another inferential leap that you can overlook there. So I'm tempted to use the pandemic, but I won't because we've had enough of that. But an example of that would be kind of anthropogenic climate change. Now, science, all the evidence that we have indicates that anthropogenic climate change is taking place. So that's what all the evidence is saying, right? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we should do anything at all about it. It doesn't. It could, and we tend to take it that way. Oh, if the planet's warming up, then we should stop that. So we should take steps to prevent that. In a lot of cases, that would probably be better off for that. But the point is that that's another inferential leap. You can imagine somewhere in Canada, like Alberta, for instance, in Edmonton, where a little global warming might actually be nice. Make the land arable. They'd be able to plant crops up there and grow things. They'd have a food supply. So they might actually think it's a good thing. So they might actually even consider it something like a technology. Rather than see anthropogenic climate change as a bad thing to be avoided, they might say, look, we just figured out a way to warm up the climate. Isn't that awesome? Now we can have food up here. Yeah, and the point is there are entire kind of sectors of our intellectual life and of our life as human beings that science simply is not equipped to be able to cover. It simply can't do it, right? It's not. So scientific errors in that view. So those people, when they go on and say we should listen to the science, well, I don't want to entirely say like just you're welcome to believe whatever you want regarding facts. So we should listen to the science regarding the facts. However, we should not just think that science can tell us what to do on the basis of that. But scientism is kind of that view. Right.